Hi, I'm Jerome Jennings, Product Manager for SPX, and today we're going to be walking through a pinion shaft oil seal replacement on a Marley gear reducer. So this particular unit is a Series 22 model, and I'll be talking a little bit about pulling the seal off and replacing it, and going through some other details. Now obviously I'm in an ideal environment here, but in real application you're obviously inside of a tight cooling tower. So you're going to have a fan up on your fan shaft, on the output shaft of the gear reducer, and then you're obviously going to have coupling or drive shaft with a motor mounted on the input shaft. So I'm skipping ahead to just the oil seal part, but just keep in mind that you'd be in a tight situation where you'd be inside a cooling tower, so obviously take safety important as necessary for the site, and be sure that you would remove the coupling and get the motor out of the way if necessary to get access to the pinion cage. Another important step to get started with the gear reducer is that it's in service. It obviously has oil inside of the unit. So that's typically going to be about halfway up on the internals of the box. There is a elbow over to the side of the unit that shows you where that level should be. So it's important to get that level drained down to a sufficient level prior to opening this pinion cage cap. Otherwise you're going to get a lot of oil loss, cause a big mess, and people won't be happy. So make sure you drain that down first, and then you're ready to go. You can do that drain down either by the back of the gearbox. There is a plug back here that you can drain from, and a lot of gearboxes when they're installed in the tower will have a hose running out along the side of the unit over to the sidewall of the tower, and could be up to a dipstick. So you could drain it from that junction of where the hose meets the upper dipstick portion as well. So a couple ways to do that. Once you have the oil drained down, you got your tools ready, you can go ahead and get started. So a few tools we'll use. We'll just use a typical socket. For this particular box, it's a 9/16 size on the bolts. So we've got that tool to get those undone. We'll have a file, just in case we have any burrs that we need to clean up on the shaft or keyway. And then we'll go into a little bit of how to tape up that shaft so that when we put the new seal on, we don't scar up our brand new seal. So those are kind of some of the critical tools, and I'll go into more detail now on how to actually do this. All right, so jumping into further detail, after we've gotten our coupling or drive shaft removed, when we got the shaft of the gear reducer here on the input pinion shaft is what this is called, which you'll typically have as a key in the keyway slot. So the next step would be to go ahead and get that key out of there. Here in this situation, I have an ideal keyway and key that was set up for a testing procedure. So this key comes right out really easily. But in the field, this key would be in here very tight. A lot of corrosion could occur over time, so it could be really jammed in there. So you'd have various tools. You could get your hammer up under here and try to wedge this guy up and then out of the keyway. So the first step is get rid of that key. Once you've done that, and you verified again that the oil level's been reduced, so you're not going to spill oil out, you can start taking all these bolts out. As I mentioned before, these are 9/16 on this particular size gearbox, but could vary depending on the specific gear reducer you have. There's an inner row as well as an outer row. So we'll go ahead and take all of those bolts out. So as we remove our last bolt, and these bolts may be a little bit tricky to get out as they've been operating a cooling tower, so you may have to really crank on them. But once you get them all loose, we'll then be ready to pull off the pinion cage cap, this casted piece here. So as you begin to pull off that cap, first thing you'll notice is that with that cap there are shims that are right behind it. And those shims are what's keeping the proper gear setting for this particular gearbox. So you want to pull that straight off, and you have your whole cap with your shims. So these two shims we're probably going to use again, so you want to go ahead and set these off to the side and make sure you use them again in the future. And what those are doing is they're actually placed on this outer circle here, and that's given the proper distance to the inner portion so that when everything's torqued, bolted and torqued down, that this inner piece is going to be at the proper distance relative to those shims. And that's what's controlling your gear setting inside your box. That's what keeps the gear reducer running quiet, keeps it running for a long time, and keeps it from getting too hot if the gears were too close together. So that's keeping your proper setting distance very important. Another thing you'll notice as we look at the inside of the pinion cage cap is that there's an O-ring here, and there's also the main seal. So this is the seal we're trying to get after. That's the pinion shaft oil seal. So this is a lip type seal. You can see just a rubber piece here, and that lip This is a single lip rubber seal, and it is actually gripping on the shaft in this location right here. So that's what's keeping all the oil inside your gear reducer from coming out, is that single lip seal. So very important. And as you pull it out, you can kind of inspect it and look for any kind of cracks or wear, degradation, and get an understanding for why that needs to be replaced. This particular one looks in pretty good shape. Again, we're in an idealized environment here where this is a pretty fresh seal that hasn't seen a lot of wear time. But this seal could be in pretty bad shape depending on your application. So your options once you've removed the pinion cage cap are to remove the seal itself and try to put a new seal in, or you could just try to replace this whole piece. You could get a new cap, a new seal, and a new O-ring with new hardware, all in a kit that you can purchase from SPX. So sometimes that's the preferred method if you don't want to go through the extra labor of trying to get this seal out and get your new seal in. So keep that in mind. I just want to show you a couple different versions of seals you might see in the gear reducer that SPX has used over the years. So this particular one here is called the Clipper seal. It's a black single piece cartridge, and it would fit down inside the pinion cage cap just like you saw from the lip seal. And it's a two-piece arrangement where the inner member actually rotates. So two pieces, but essentially built into one cartridge style seal. So this seal was used for several years, and you may see some of these in your gear reducer as well. These would be replaced by the lip seal that we saw earlier. Another type of seal that you may see is what's called an ISO mag. It's actually mag for magnetic. So it's a two-part seal. This piece here actually rotates with the shaft, so that's the rotor, and it has magnets built into it. The stator fits down in the cap, again very similar to the lip seal we saw earlier, and those magnets actually connect to the stator portion so it can actually stay in there. And that part would rotate with the shaft on this O-ring that's built into it. So these seals were used for several years as well, but again they're now obsolete and have been replaced with the lip type seal. So as we mentioned earlier, the lip type seal that we took off of this unit is down in this cavity. So as I mentioned, you have an option to go ahead and replace that seal as is. If you do that, you can purchase just the seal, and here's the seal itself. Again, lip type seal, spring loaded to keep it against the shaft. You can get that seal, and it usually comes with a spacer piece. So that spacer is nice because it gives you a little extra room. If you pull this existing seal out and place the spacer and the seal back into the cavity, you've essentially repositioned the seal ever so slightly on your shaft. So if you did have any scoring or grooving or nicks in the seal area over time as the seal was wearing against that shaft, this spacer essentially helps move that seal ever so slightly in a new position so you get a fresh surface to wear on. So that's one option. That does involve someone going in here and trying to drive out the existing seal. Usually you have to get on the back side of it, some kind of screwdriver or tool to really drive it out. Then once you get it out, usually you want some kind of little hand arbor press to get your seal pressed back into place and get it flush all the way down to the bottom of that cavity. Could also be achieved with a large washer if it's just the right size, but you really should not use inappropriate tools here. You don't want to drive this seal in with a screwdriver or anything because you could damage it and cause oil leaks. The other option, as I mentioned earlier, is you can buy the whole kit. So you can get a brand new cap ready to go that's already got the lip seal pressed into it. It's got the spacer underneath to reposition it on the shaft, and SPX also provides you with a new O-ring as well as new stainless steel hardware for the bolt connection from the cap to the gearbox case. So that's a nice kit. You're going to pay a little extra money for that, but it's real nice in the field to get all the parts you need, get it done right the first time, and save some labor. Okay, so we've talked about the different types of seals and what our options are. So let's go ahead and start getting this gear reducer ready to get that seal installed. So it's important to look at the condition of the shaft and look for any signs of nicks or cuts or on the keyway, and especially, because keep in mind we're going to be putting a brand new seal right over the shaft, over the sharp keyway edges. So any kind of sharp points could nick and cut that seal, which would compromise it, and you could end up with a leak when you turn the unit back on. So very important to take care of that. So as I mentioned before, with a file as one of your tools to have on hand, you may want to just look for little nicks And again, just try to knock some of those sharp edges off. Be careful not to cut yourself, but you can run your finger lightly over there and look for any of those sharp edges. Clean them up as necessary to get that keyway in good order. After you've got your keyway cleaned up, then you might want to look to kind of clean up the shaft. Again, we had a coupling mounted on here originally if it's in a cooling tower application. So you may have a portion of the shaft that's in pretty good shape, but there may be a portion that's been exposed to the environment in the cooling tower. There's a lot of rust, corrosion buildup. So if you have a piece of emery cloth, which is basically real fine grit sandpaper, you can clean up some of that corrosion that exists. And you can essentially run this in all different directions. Now be careful when you're doing this that you do not sand down here below the keyway. This is where your seal is going to be riding, and you don't want to damage or nick or scratch that surface area. You got to have a really fine surface finish for that seal to seal properly. So keep your sanding to the base of the keyway and out. Now this could take a lot of work. Obviously I'm in an ideal environment where my shaft is in pretty good shape, but that may take you quite some time in the field to get the shaft to a condition where you're ready to go ahead and put the seal back on. Okay, so we've cleaned up our shaft, we've got our keyway deburred, we've cleaned up our shaft a little bit, and we're getting ready to put the seal on. One last step that's recommended is to take some type of, you can use electrical tape, which is what I'm going to show, and there's some other options out there, a piece of mylar tape, something really thin and sticky that you can cover your keyway with, and preferably your entire shaft around the keyway as an additional safeguard. That way if there's any little bit of corrosion or nicks or cuts that you may have missed on the keyway and shaft, that tape will coat that so that your seal has a nice, smooth, clean, fresh surface to push down and over to minimize the risk of cutting it. So I'm going to use electrical tape. In some cases, people will just try to go straight down the keyway like this. That's one method to do it to protect the most damaging part, which is the keyway edges. But what I'm going to show you is the preferred way, which is to tape the entire shaft with a spiraling effect. So you want to start right at the base of your keyway. Again, don't go too far down because our cap's going to cover some of that. And then you essentially want to bring the tape, spiral it towards you, minimizing the overlap. And when you get to the end, just go ahead and pull it to end it. So there you go. We've effectively created a barrier of protection for our shaft before we insert the seal. Okay, now that the shaft's coated, we're going to want to begin to insert the seal, but one last step. Since there's a lot of oil in this unit that you originally had that you've drained down into a bucket or some other reservoir, you can take just a little bit of that oil, and I've got it here in a little dropper, but just take a little bit with your finger, put a couple drops on here. This is just going to give you a little extra slipperiness, reduce the coefficient of friction on this tape so that it doesn't hang up on the seal. So you want to get that a 360-degree swath there of a little bit of lubricant. And then with that same finger that you've just done that, you can go ahead and apply that to your new seal. Just go ahead and give it just a little bit of lubricant too. We don't know how long this seal may have been sitting around on the job site. So just give it a little bit more elasticity so it's less likely to be damaged during the installation process. So now we've got the seal lubed up and ready to go in the shaft. So now we're ready to get started. We'll just go ahead and place the O-ring into its groove where it fits. So one other step is to go ahead and install the O-ring. And I'm showing you here the kit that SPX provides. So again, the new pinion cage cap, new seal with a spacer underneath of it. Got my O-ring in its groove. And then I've also got the new stainless steel hardware. So I'm ready to install. So we're ready to install. And it's important to note that the pinion cage cap can really only go one way, actually two ways, back onto the gear reducer. There's a hole at the top center and then two holes to the sides on the inner. So this way's good, this way won't work, this way's good, and this way won't work. So only two real ways. Also, you're going to grab your shims that we mentioned earlier. Again, these are keeping that critical gear setting, so you'll want to have those together with you as well. A nice trick you might do is put baling wire on there to keep them together as you set them on your on your pinion cage cap as you're ready to do the install. All right, so once you've got that ready to go, we're going to push this seal and cap assembly onto the shaft, and the key is to keep it straight, even, and smooth as you do the install. You want to minimize any kind of wobbling, as that could damage the seal. We'll just slide it on, keeping it straight, and voila. Once we get to that point, we want to get one bolt in there to help hang those shims inside, keep them from falling. Just get that started. And then essentially, you've got your cap installed. Get this guy tightened down a little bit more. And then you should be able to take your tape and remove it. And if you did it correctly and started at the base of the keyway like I had mentioned, it should pull right off. And now you can go ahead and continue with putting the rest of your bolts into their respective places on both the inner and outer circles. Okay, so as we go ahead and tighten these bolts in, it's important to use a crossing pattern, and you should be tightening them to 40 foot-pounds. So you can proceed with tightening all your bolts in a crossing pattern. Another thing I wanted to show is a speedy sleeve. So this is an installation method that is sometimes used in industrial applications. It's basically a thin piece of metal, hence the term sleeve, and it's meant to be quick, hence the term speedy. So the idea is that you can use one of these speedy sleeves, and if your shaft has a lot of nicks and grooves in the area where the seal was at, that you can actually slide this over it. Now I've got this one purposely oversized for this demonstration to make it easier, but normally this would be really tight on the shaft, so it would be pretty challenging to get it slid all the way down and into position where that seal's at, and then your seal would then ride on top of this surface. So the challenge is how tight it is against the shaft and how flimsy it is. So it's real easy to get it cocked one way or the other and have some installation error, which could cause leaks as you get it on the shaft. So we really don't recommend the speedy sleeve. They've been used in the past, but they're just really not recommended. It's better to go back in with a complete replacement cap with the spacer in there. That way you're shifting the position of the seal. Okay, so we've covered a pinion shaft oil seal replacement on a Marley Series 2200. You should check online to get the operating manual for the specific gear reducer that you have to make sure you follow those procedures properly. Finally, after you've installed your seal, it's important to put everything back the way it was in the cooling tower. So key goes back in its keyway. Again, this is an ideal version, but you may have to tap that key into its keyway. Then you're going to reinstall the coupling or drive shaft, get it properly aligned with the motor, do all your shimming as needed to get everything properly aligned. And then you're also going to want to go ahead and get oil back in your gear reducer. Very important. Don't want to start your gearbox up without oil or a low oil. So you can bring your oil level back up to halfway up this pinion shaft, again following the elbow on the side and the manual. And once your oil's in place, you've taken care of all the safety precautions with the tower, the customer can go ahead and start back up. And if you need help learning about the coupling alignment or drive shaft alignment, check out our other videos. Again, I'm Jerome Jennings, Product Manager. Thanks for watching.